The Deer Farming Channel is brought to you in part by Record Rack Deer and Elk Feeds. As a deer hunter, I want to know all I can about America's favorite big game animal. That's why I became a deer farmer. Without deer farms, we lose our greatest resource for research and whitetail management. With them, we gain more knowledge than ever before. Join me as we discover the truth about whitetails and meet those who work every day to preserve this great species for future generations. My name is Keith Warren, and this is Deer and Wildlife Stories. Every year, it's a 6-week-long road trip as we travel around the country filming some of the biggest deer on the planet. And we always wind up back here in my home state of Texas. Today, we're less than an hour east of Dallas at the Big Rack Ranch. Like most deer farmers, John True started out deer farming as a hobby. And all of a sudden, after a few years, he started growing some really impressive deer, and he realized suddenly that this hobby could turn into a very profitable business.
I'm John True with Big Rack Ranch. We're located about 45 minutes east of Dallas, just north of a town called Terrell, Texas. Our breeding operation is located inside a 2,000-acre ranch. We've got about 60 acres, roughly 35 pens, about 300 deer. We've been breeding whitetails here since the late 90s, and our goal is to grow the biggest, best looking bucks we can. We like big framey typicals with some character, whether it be flyers and kickers and drops. Love helping people out, selling bred does, selling breeder bucks, stocker bucks, whatever it could be, to increase genetics on other ranches in Texas.
I first came to Big Rack Ranch back in early June. The fawns were really young. They had just been born, and many of them were meeting their surrogate mothers for the first time.
One thing that makes us unique from a breeding operation standpoint is we're raising some fawns we're using goats as surrogate mothers instead of just bottle raising the fawns. We're actually taking the goats and letting them raise them themselves. It's still on a timed basis. We're started out at 4 times and 3 times, 2 times per day. We're not leaving them with them all the time. It still takes manpower and it takes time, but it cuts down on cleaning bottles and buying the milk, and so it's been a great thing for us, and we've had great results with the fawns.
All right, let's say you've got a piece of property, a high fence piece of property, and you really want to supercharge your genetics, but you don't want to have a deer farm. There's a way to do that. It's called the DMP program. And what you wind up doing on your piece of property, you have to get it licensed through Texas Parks and Wildlife, but you put up a high fence, and then you capture the does that are on your property and you put them in that little high fence pen area. Well, what do you do for a buck? What you do is you call John True and you get a DMP buck, and you lease a buck from him. You take a look at his pens. His pens are full of giant, good-looking, deep pedigreed bucks. You lease that buck. He'll deliver it to you, say in November. It will breed all the does, and he'll pick it up in January. And so all those does are now bred, and they're in that pen. What you wind up doing is you leave those does in that pen, and they have food and water, and they just incubate those babies, and those babies are born in that pen. They're born and raised in the pen, and at some point, you open up the gate, you let those deer out onto that piece of property, and you have supercharged your genetics.
I love helping other people out, ranch owners in the state of Texas that call me needing help, looking for advice on their place, big or small, a couple hundred acres, a couple thousand acres. It's a passion of mine to kind of get into it and figure out a plan that works for them. Put a package of does together, maybe include a buck or not, but just ultimately get them to where they want their land to be at the end of the day. Whatever their goals are, whatever they want to produce, whatever they want to have on their ranch, I take a lot of pride and joy in helping others get to that success.
I first came to Big Rack Ranch back in early June. The fawns were really young. They had just been born, and many of them were meeting their surrogate mothers for the first time. You better not. You can't put that on. I won't.
It's going on the show.
I won't write you a check.
And that's going on the show,
Don't do it. The Deer Farming Channel is brought to you in part by New Dart, leading the industry in accuracy. Well, howdy, John.
Hey, Keith. How
Good
are
to see you.
You too.
All right, tell me, oh, look at this right here. Who is this guy?
This is Ace of Blades last year at 3, and we bred with him for the first time last year, and we'll see him in a little bit.
Oh, that's beautiful. So you got babies out of him?
I do, this year, yes sir.
All right, well, I want to see Dos Sancho.
Come on.
That's got to be Dos Sancho, the famous Dos Sancho.
Yes sir, that's him.
Oh, look at him. How old?
That's him at 5 years old.
And you've got some offspring on the ground?
We do. We've had a bunch. We had a great set of bucks last year, and we got another set of bucks this year that are looking great.
So we'll see them today?
Yes, sir.
And who's this guy up here?
That's Kid Dynamite at 7 last year. He was 330. We have a bunch of bucks out of him as well that we'll see today, and we're pretty excited about him.
Well, let's go look at some deer, man.
Let's do it.
All right, well, it's clear most of them are yearlings. I mean, it looks
Right.
like probably 4 or 5 are not yearlings, right? I mean, these are some nice young deer.
We just there's 2 in here that we've got one that's a 2-year-old at a witch doctor that I used to cover a group of doe fawns last year.
Is he the one with the drop on him?
He is.
Okay.
Kind of lays out wide, and he's been slow growing this year.
Yeah,
but
you
I'm
can
excited
tell,
about him.
Looking at
Yeah.
him, he's still got a ways to go. I mean, so, but a 2-year-old at a witch doctor, and how many others are in here that are not yearlings?
The only one is the buck I call Super Dandy.
I can tell which one that is.
Yep, he's a big 6x6, and he's 3 this year. And we bred with him for the first time last year as a 2-year-old.
So you got fawns on the ground out of him?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and as far as fawns on the ground out of him, would some of them be being raised by the goats?
We got a couple in there.
Okay,
for
all
sure.
right, but then I'm looking at him going, that's a typical look that y'all are so well known for. I mean, he's clean, typical. Look how long his tines are. He's just a beautiful deer.
Right.
Okay, so, but these fawns that you got on the ground are the first group out of him, so
Yes,
you
sir.
really don't
That's
know what
right.
they're going to go into.
That's right, and I'm excited about him because he's out of he's out of shadow, but the bottom side, his mother is Monarch on Yankee Doodle Dandy, so really cleaned up a classic bottom on that, and
Okay.
He's got a look that I love.
The rest of them in here, they all won then?
They are everything in here. We've got some Dos Sancho, some couple of really nice little yearlings that I'm excited about.
Mm-hmm.
There's one in there, Yellow 410, I'm real excited about, and there's a couple. He's a G Hammer son.
Okay, you know, as you talk about the pedigrees, not to interrupt you, but you're talking about the pedigrees, and we mentioned Dos Sancho. Okay, Dos Sancho is kind of like, right now, he's your marquee buck. I mean, he's
Right.
the one that's really getting it done. All of them are getting it done, but he just has got the look that's really, well, everybody's looking for. But I look at every one of these pedigree-wise. Have you got them in the registry?
I do, yes, sir.
So
For
in
sure.
NADAR, you've got, if somebody wants to look
Absolutely.
at them, you can just provide a NADAR certificate. Can you email those by chance? I mean, if somebody was watching this show and said, look, I want to see their certificate on Yellow 410 right there.
Absolutely.
Could you just email it to them?
Sure.
And folks, what NADAR is, it's a system that people in the deer farming community wind up using to be able to look at pedigrees. And if you're a member of the Texas Deer Association or NADIFA, you're in NADAR, you can go online 24/7 and check out all kinds of stuff. There's guys that spend hours doing that.
It's a great tool.
It is a great tool to check out the pedigrees to be able to predict what we can grow here. And I look at it and I think Dandy is a dandy. He's absolutely beautiful. He's got everything. But then again, I'm looking at the you know, the witch doctor's son again is called what?
Medicine Man.
Medicine Man. Why
There you
can't I
go.
remember that? Okay, but look at him. I mean, he's beautiful. And I think both of them, the Medicine Man, I'm kind of curious what he's going to go into at 3. But at 3 years old, you really pretty much have a good idea of what they're going to be, don't you?
Yes, sir. Yes,
so
sir.
when do you use them for breeding?
I'll,
At what
you know,
age?
If I have yearlings that I'm excited about, I'll usually let them cover some doe fawns, just expose them to some doe fawns, and if I can get some babies out of them, and then they turn into something at 2 or 3, then I'm a step ahead,
Right.
Which is great. But usually I won't start until they're 2, and try to keep it where it's a manageable number for them. And by the time they're 3, I know if they've got what I want in there, and we'll start concentrating more on getting numbers.
Well, Dandy has got what you want, I guarantee you.
I love them.
The Deer Farming Channel is brought to you in part by Record Rack Deer and Elk Feeds. All right, so this pen, first off, I'm looking at it, I'm going across the board. There's just real pretty deer, and it seems like so far I've seen older deer, older bucks in with your yearling bucks. And right here, I'm looking at that deer, and I've been trying to think, who is he? And that's got to be, what do you call him, Ace of Blades?
Ace of Blades. He's
Okay.
4 this year.
Yeah, I was going to say, because to me, I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm familiar with the deer that you had last year, and I'm looking at him going, okay, to me, he's 4, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, he looks better at 4 than he did at 3. Do you think so too?
I think so too. He cleaned up quite a bit. He was I've always loved him. I loved his pedigree for my breeding and his look more than anything. His good main beams, and he had double rode up last year, really on both sides, and he worked well with some other girls that I had, and so I bred him, and I bred him to about 10 girls or so last year, and I really think it had something to do. He cleaned him up this year, and I love his look. It's still great. He's still just wide open, and he doesn't really turn back in. His beams just keep going out.
Yeah, he's beautiful, and if you're wondering how many does would a guy typically use if he wasn't artificially inseminating, how many does would he put a buck on to breed? How many would you say? I mean, max, before he really starts going backwards.
Right. I mean, 20 to 30 is kind of as a high number.
And I'm like at 20 level. I mean, I don't have a problem breeding one to 20 does. I mean, but if you look at Ace of Blades, I mean, with only 10 does exposing him to, I know you've got fawns and out of the ground out of him.
Yes, sir.
And the deal is, it didn't do anything. It kind of, in actuality, it helped him out. But there's some. Who's this other big deer in here?
That's a 2-year-old. It's a Kid Dynamite's son.
Oh, okay.
And he was another buck that covered some doe fawns, or I exposed some doe fawns to last year. I call him Cherry Bomb.
Oh, well, he's got it going on.
Yeah, he's a big boy. But he and Medicine Man covered the 2 groups of doe fawns last year, and he's big.
Okay, so you did use 2 yearlings in last year.
Yes, sir.
To expose those 2, and but that's one thing, folks, that deer breeders that have confidence in their genetics, like John has confidence in his genetics, can take a couple of yearlings and expose it to some deer to see what they get. Because what happens if at 3 years old, if Cherry Bomb blows up really, really big, or any other yearling that would blow up really big, then you've already got deer on the ground to back him up and show, see, he's a producer. But he is a beautiful deer. He's got a lot on his head. Now, but these other yearlings in here, they're just beautiful.
There's some good ones in here for sure.
So who is this guy, 414, yellow 414? Who is he?
He's a Triple Crown son, yearling.
That's a yearling?
Yes, sir.
Really?
He looks good.
Holy smokes. Okay, blood-wise, I mean, when you hear Triple Crown, everybody, when you hear Triple Crown, perk up, because Triple Crown has gotten it done. And look at that. I mean, as a yearling, he is beautiful.
Thank you. He has a twin brother too, and they're both big. All of the bucks out of those breedings have really looked good in the pens this year.
Wow. Okay, if somebody wanted more information about Big Rack Ranch, give them a website to go to.
Sure, www.bigrackranchwhitetails.com.
The Deer Farming Channel is brought to you in part by New Dart, leading the industry in accuracy. All I can say is wow. It looks like they're all 3-year-olds?
Everything in here's 3.
Holy smokes, John. Okay, you know, in looking at the farm, and then looking at these 3-year-olds here and how big they are, the one thing that I noticed is that you really don't have a lot of older deer, older bucks. And I guess the reason why is at 3 years old, you're going to decide whether they're going to stay on the Big Rack Ranch team or you're going to get rid of them. And folks, if you're wondering where they go, if they don't stay right here at Big Rack Ranch, tell them ultimately where these deer go.
Right, every buck that, I mean, if it's 3 years old here, it's for sale with me. And it's either going to stock a ranch, and I'll sell like a group of bucks together to stock a ranch to increase their genetics.
Right, okay, we're talking about we stock the ranch to improve the genetic base that they have on that ranch, and people are doing that all over Texas. I mean, the borders are closed in Texas, so we can't move these deer outside of Texas, and we can't bring deer in Texas. But if you're a rancher in Texas, you want to improve your genetics with good quality deer, the best way to do it is to call John and get some good quality deer. And literally the best time to do that is now, come in August, so you can see the deer and they can knock them down and they move them. We have to do it by a certain date with Texas Parks and Wildlife and deliver them. He'll deliver them right to your place in a trailer, and you've got instant genetics. So that really is just the first option for 3-year-old bucks like this. And I know another option that you have would be that many of these deer, because they all have a phenomenal pedigree when you start looking at them, and I know you use GMS, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and GMS is one of the greatest management tools as far as a deer breeder has ever seen. Tell everybody what it is and why it's such a good tool.
GMS for me is everything as far as breeding goes, as far as making decisions on what to breed and when to breed it. For me, as a management tool, I can go into the pedigree software and enter individual animals and then track their offspring. I use it to submit DNA. It's very user-friendly from that standpoint as far as submitting DNA samples. And then when the DNA samples come back, it instantly uploads into my GMS where I don't have to enter any information.
All right, if somebody wants more information on Big Rack Ranch, give them a website.
www.bigrackranchwhitetails.com.
Looking at the deer on today's show, it's easy to see how much time and effort's gone into the breeding program. The result? Well, it's basically a new genetic line that is clearly successful. It was also interesting to learn how some of these fawns are being fed by surrogate mothers. If you have any questions or comments about the show, I'd love to hear from you. Look me up on Facebook. I'm Keith Warren, and thanks for watching Deer and Wildlife Stories. What you're about to see is graphic in nature, so viewer discretion is advised. Last August, many of Texas's deer farmers were forced to kill hundreds of perfectly healthy deer in order to test them for chronic wasting disease. To date, approximately 600 deer have been killed, and the killing isn't over. What's worse is that out of all the deer that were killed, not a single one of them tested positive for chronic wasting disease. I don't know about you, but to me there's just something wrong with the picture when you start killing perfectly healthy deer to test them to make sure they're not sick with chronic wasting disease. Now, CWD has been around for over 50 years, and I'm a believer that CWD, it needs to be managed from science-based management rather than from a political agenda. And I think that we ought to learn from states that have been battling CWD for more than 50 years, and they themselves say that there's nothing they can do to manage it. What they need to do is just monitor it. So again, I think that we ought to base our CWD stuff all on science and not on a political agenda. If you'd like to find out more about chronic wasting disease, let me encourage you to go to the website cwdmyths.com.